I do get very, very annoyed when I hear Jews mounting the argument, why are you picking on us? Why are you picking on me? I haven't done anything. I'm just a British Jew. I'm not responsible for what Israel does. And that leaves absolutely hanging in the air the unspoken agreement that Israel is doing something terrible. He repeated the canard that the Israelis are committing genocide. Now that is false. It is inciting hatred, because if people are committing genocide, you have to destroy them. If Israel is evil, and if the vast majority of Jews support Israel, then the vast majority of Jews are evil. I think it's wrong to think of these marches as primarily being organized in order to protest about the war in Gaza. The driving force is Islamism. If Britain wanted to put down a red line against the Islamization of Britain, it would be saying, these marches, we know what these marches are, we're not going to have that. And we are going to show the Islamists that we understand the game they're playing, and we are not going to allow it. And that itself would send a very, very important signal to those Islamists.
Okay, everyone, I have to say, I have a list of a few guests that we have on JTV that I always look forward to so much, because they just have such insightful wisdom to share with all of us. And Melanie Phillips, you truly are one of those guests. Thank you so much for making the time to be here on JTV. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to see you, Ollie. Hope you're doing okay.
Doing good. And I'm thrilled to have before me your new book, and to encourage everyone to get a copy of this, Fighting the Hate, a handbook for Jews under siege. Melanie's written a number of books, actually. Last time we spoke, it was to discuss this one, The Builder's Stone, another barnstormer, how Jews and Christians built the West and why only they can save it. Melanie, there's so much to talk about that you cover in this book, but it's not just theoretical stuff. It's happening day to day, and literally some of the stuff that you talk about in this book, you were debating on Sky News just a few days ago. And I wanted to go right into this very first topic of the genocide accusation that Israel faces, because, well, first of all, let's just see what you had to say, because you were reacting to Zach Polanski from the Green Party and claiming that this really is just a modern day iteration of the ancient blood libel.
I think he is a menace to public safety, and his remarks to you were absolutely despicable. I counted at least 6 references to the fact that he was Jewish. He is using his Jewish ancestry as a shield to protect him from what he's doing. He himself is inciting hatred. Again, in his interview with you, he repeated the canard that the Israelis are committing genocide. Now, that is false. It is inciting hatred, because if people are committing genocide, you have to destroy them. He also has not...
It is fair to say people are allowed to come on television and express that view if they believe it.
That's for people who run television to decide those parameters.
Well, certainly in this studio, people are allowed to say things that are lawful.
Well, fine.
Whatever you think about them.
Fine.
So, Melanie, this is the first things I wanted to talk about, the genocide accusation, and whether you believe this should be considered hate speech.
Yes, it is incitement. I mean, people are entitled and have a right to say what they like. But if you are accusing a people of genocide, then you're accusing them of one of the worst, most heinous crimes that a collective can commit. And it means that you're looking at them, it means that you're presenting them as not just wrong, but absolutely monstrous, that they are evil, that they are demonic. And consequently, you are inciting people to want to get rid of them, certainly to hate them, and to think that they have no right to be treated as anything other than pariahs. And really, they should be hounded out of civil society and basically removed from the face of the earth. Because that's what you do with people who are committing genocide. You destroy them. You go to battle against them. You go to war against them, and you kill them. So that accusation, I think, coming in the framework, I think this is very important also to say, this accusation of genocide didn't come out of nowhere. it came against the framework of systematic media lies about what Israel was doing in Gaza, which represented its war of defense as a war of aggression, and crucially, which kept saying over and over again that the Israelis were wantonly killing civilians and were killing babies. Now, that inspires absolute rage in any decent person, obviously,
Yeah.
but it was
Yeah.
a lie. These things are complete lies. And consequently, they need to be called out as lies. They need to be opposed as lies. They need to be, that conversation needs to be shut down by being shown to be not just false, but murderous in intent. And that hasn't been done.
By the way, guys, just wanted to say, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, like our video, comment, hype our videos. All these things really help us to grow, to get into the algorithm, and to continue to delivering videos, which I hope you will really appreciate. And when people will say, well, Melanie, I'm entitled to create my own characterization of the way Israel's government behaves, and I can separate that very clearly from my condemnation of anti-Semitism. Do you feel, as I do, that there is no distinction, meaningful distinction, between the anti-Semitic violence that we saw on the streets of London just last week and calling Israel genocidal, for the very simple fact that, aside from it being the one and only Jewish state that you're claiming is targeting children and babies and genocidal, the vast majority of Jews support Zionism. So by saying that, you are stating that most Jews are evil. So you can't disconnect the two.
Well, that's absolutely right. If Israel is evil, and if the vast majority of Jews support Israel, then the vast majority of Jews are evil. And therefore, you have to do to the vast majority of Jews what you would want to do to Israel, which is destroy them. Now, that doesn't mean that, everyone's going to go out on the street and murder them, but it does mean that when they hear that, they believe that the Israelis have no right to exist in an abstract kind of way. And when people take it out on Jews in Britain or anywhere else, then the vast majority of people will shrug and say, well, they had it coming to them, because, of course, alone among peoples, the Jews are held collectively responsible for what Israel does. And that's another aspect of this. But you certainly can't separate them. One follows from the other.
I'm curious to know your view on a debate I was having with a friend of mine a few weeks ago. He's clearly Jewish, wears a kippah, yarmulke, was walking around a shopping mall in London. And this non-Jewish guy yelled at him, "You better not be a Zionist." And he was going up the escalator, this guy was going down, so he didn't have a chance to respond. But had he had the chance to respond, I said, what would you have said? He said, I would have said to him, why are you making any assumption about my views? And why did you pick on me, of all people? You tell me that you're against Zionism, but not against the Jews. So why did you pick on me? You have no idea what my views are. Now, his intention was to expose their supposed claim that they're separating Zionism and anti-Semitism. But my view is, and I want to know your view, that that's not a good tactic, because it's still playing into their hands. It's still telling them, it's asserting that they are right, that there is a distinction. And I think much better to just lean into the fact that the Jewish people fundamentally support Israel. And I feel like the more we try to create that separation, the more we're going along with this narrative that Israel is doing something terrible that requires Jews to kind of separate themselves from. The same way that, we'll hear people saying, no one holds all Russians accountable for the actions of Putin. But implicit in that is that Israel's actions are comparable to Putin. And I feel like we should, as Jews, collectively show that we fully are behind Israel's actions.
Yes, I mean, I do get very, very annoyed when I hear Jews mounting the argument. And in fact, there was a book that was written making this argument not that long ago, much lionized, which says, why are you picking on us? Why are you picking on me? I haven't done anything. I'm just a British Jew. I'm not responsible for what Israel does. And that leaves absolutely hanging in the air the unspoken agreement that Israel is doing something terrible.
Yes.
I think it depends on the circumstances, what I'm saying in my book. There's no one template for how to respond to this kind of onslaught. It depends who's doing it, where, and in what kind of background, in what kind of context. Now, you talk about someone going up and down escalators. And there was no time, there was no opportunity to engage. If somebody shouts at you something like that in the street, what should you do? Now, some people will say, well, I would stand up and argue. I would stand up and make my point. And another person would say, well, I would thump him on the nose. Okay, so let's put to one side the person who would thump him on the nose. I do not approve of that, would not suggest that that's what should happen. Should that person, if that sort of thing is shouted at you in the street, should that person say, hang on, I'm going to tell you what's what?
Yeah.
And I would be very careful, because I do think that while one must not ever run away from this, and the whole point of my book is to show people how they can stand up as proud Jews and fight back, you must look after your personal safety first and foremost. You really, in this kind of climate, you really can't take the risk that somebody who's just shouting at you might then come at you with a knife. And, I just would not recommend that course of action to anybody. But if somebody says it to you in more kind of calm circumstances, where, you judge that the physical risk is low, how to respond is to say, how I would respond, I am a proud Zionist, and let me tell you why.
Yeah.
Because people don't know what a Zionist is. They think it's like, I don't know what they think. They think it's like Nazi. You have to call them out, and you have to say, I am standing on the moral high ground by saying I am a Zionist and defending Israel. And you must not, in my view, as a Jew, take refuge in this weaselly formulation, as you've just been saying. Why are you being horrible to me? I've got nothing to do with it. It is a point to make in general discussion that there is something that is singular and absolute double standard, that it's only the Jews who are held responsible for the crimes of Israel. So this is in itself wrong. But if you're being assailed personally with this, then I think it's right and proper to stand up and say, I'm a proud Zionist, I'm a proud supporter of Israel, I believe Israel is the most moral country in the world, or whatever. And then, hopefully the person will come back in a calm way, and you can then explain. But again, in my book, I'm also saying that there are many of these situations where people throw things at you in conversation, and it really isn't appropriate or helpful to have a long discussion, because then you're not going to get anywhere. What I'm saying in the book is, don't lower your expectations. Don't assume. Don't imagine that you can persuade somebody who thinks Israel is the fount of evil, that after one conversation with you, they're going to say, oh, I get it now. Israel is the most moral country on the planet. They're not going to ever say that. What you can only hope to do, in my view, is to, when faced with a closed mind like that, is to open that mind a crack, just a crack. And I'm suggesting a number of ways in which you can possibly do that. And it requires some forethought. It means that when you, as a diaspora Jew, go out in the morning, unfortunately now so many diaspora Jews are doing this, they are making a calculation in their minds. Do I wear my kippah on the tube? Do I wear my Magan David that is visible? If I leave the house now, will it be safe to go across central London, or will I come across a Palestine Now demonstration, Free Palestine demonstration? We're making those calculations all the time. And I'm suggesting in my book that people should mentally arm themselves before engaging with the world. Doesn't mean they're going to come across these horrible situations at all. They may not. But if they do, they should have the reassurance of knowing that they have some facts in their mind and some lines to take, even if it's just a joke, but they have thought it through beforehand, and they know, they have a little bit of an armory that they know they can deploy.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about some of your suggestions in the book in a moment. But just going back just for one more moment to this whole issue of, someone yelling at someone that's Jewish and people creating this separation. Do you think it would be a good idea, as alongside saying I'm a proud Zionist, to also say, and you cannot separate Zionism from Judaism, and that to be a Jew is to be a Zionist?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. If someone's hurling this at you in the street, I mean, like, you really isn't the occasion to do that. But I would certainly advocate saying to somebody that the person says, you're a horrible Zionist, and I would then suggest that you might say, well, I'm sure you don't mean to be a horrible. I'm sure you don't mean to say that Jews are horrible. I mean, I'm sure you're making that distinction, aren't you? In other words, give them the opportunity to say, yes, absolutely, I'm making a proper distinction because Zionism is a political project and therefore it's fine. Whereas, being horrible to Jews is not fine. I would never do that because I'm a nice person. Let them say that, and then agree that, you're glad that they're a nice person, and you're absolutely right. In other words, lean into what they're saying, lean into it, and then say, can I just explain to you why it's really, really difficult to separate these two things out? And what I would say, which they won't expect, always say something they don't expect. Don't just say, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism because all our Jews, nah. I mean, that's just like silly and it's not going to get anywhere. I would say something more subtle that they really don't expect. And I've road tested this, and people are going, "What?" And many Jews go, "What?" Which is this: that Zionism, as we think of it today, as a political project that started in the 19th century. But what is Zionism? What do you think Zionism is? But let me tell you what Zionism is. It's simply the right of the Jews to have their own country in their ancient ancestral homeland of Israel. Now, the point is this, that you may not realize, is that that's not a political project. That's part of the Jewish religion, that the Jewish religion is centered in the land of Israel. Judaism consists of, a bit like a three-legged stool, Judaism consists of the inseparable fusion of the people, the faith, and the land. Religious Jews, believe, or the religion holds, that the Jewish people received a divine instruction to live their lives according to a set of laws and precepts in order to produce lives of great value and worth in the land of Israel. That the religion is centered in the land of Israel. If you look at Jewish liturgy, you will find that the word Zion, as in Zionism, appears over and over again. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're not a religious Jew, you're not a Jew. It doesn't mean that if you don't go and live in Israel, you're not a Jew. Or if you don't support Israel, you're not a Jew. It doesn't mean that. You're a Jew regardless. But Judaism is the fusion of these three things. And so if you're an anti-Zionist, which means that you don't think that the Jews have a right to be in that land at all, then I'm afraid you are being anti-Judaism. Not necessarily anti-Jewish person, but anti-Judaism. And you're a nice person, and I don't think you really would want to be in that position. So I'm just bringing that to your attention. Something like that, in the right circumstances, would hopefully take the person aback. It takes many Jews aback. Diaspora Jews don't think like this, many of them.
Yeah.
And it would make them think and hopefully open the mind a crack through which other good stuff could, come in.
I think that's such a great point to make that point, that this is actually a religious part of our identity. And quite frankly, it's quite farcical that you'll have these people who are, they say, I'm against Israel, but, very supportive of Jews and the Jewish religion. It's like, have they read the Torah? Do they have any idea what this book it is? At a broad aerial view level, this is the story of the people of Israel being taken to their promised land of Israel. Like it's the whole story. So it's just absurd that they've created this separation. And one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was, which was being discussed, I think, on this Sky News panel that you were on, and it's just been a recent development in the UK, is Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, who's been really impressive in recent days with her moral backbone and clarity. She said that she wants to call now, in a really bold step, to ban these hate marches, these marches which purport to be pro-Palestinian, but of course we know are simply just anti-Jewish and anti-Israel. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because there are some who are saying, even people on our side, that will say, yeah, but what about free speech? Isn't this a bit of a slippery slope? And could this potentially create an even worse backlash? What are your thoughts on what she proposed?
Look, free speech is very important. And, one should lean over backwards to allow people to march or demonstrate or protest on the basis of views that other people will find offensive, difficult, unconscionable, and so on. But there is a line beyond which a decent society doesn't go. And I suggest that line is not being applied systematically, as our old friend double standards yet again. Supposing you had marches every week which defamed black people and said, we want to get rid of black people, and we don't think black people should be part of our society, and we think black people are evil and they're doing terrible things. Would that be allowed? On the contrary, it would be unthinkable. Now, why, therefore, are the Palestine marches allowed? Because people think they're simply demonstrating against the behavior of Israel in Gaza. They're demonstrating in favor of, in support of the Palestinian people. They have every right to do so. Well, they do have every right to protest against policies of Israel like anywhere else. And they certainly have the right to demonstrate on behalf of any people they consider to be oppressed. But that's not what these marches are. They are called rightly hate marches because they are promoting hate. They are chanting for the murder of Jews, Intifada now, which means the murder of Jews across the world, globalize the Intifada rather, which is the murder of Jews across the world, the destruction of Israel. They're shouting for jihad. And they are, the river to the sea is the destruction of Israel, and so on, so on, so on. Now, these things all break British laws, actually. There are laws on the statute book against all these things, but they're not being enforced. But I would suggest that that's what these marches actually are. And people of goodwill who are going on them, thinking that they are just demonstrating against horrible Israel and for the oppressed Palestinians, that may be genuine. They may genuinely think that. But the fact is, they are marching alongside people shouting these things, and therefore they are themselves part of this hate movement.
Yeah.
Now, as somebody said in Parliament, I think, the other day, or I think it may be in the counterterrorism guy, it's just not possible to separate out these terrible things that are being chanted from the demonstration. They are inescapably giving rise to these to this incitement and this law breaking. And people have said very understandably, it's appalling that the police are just standing by and letting this happen. The fact is that if these marches go ahead, if the police were to take on all these people, there are thousands of them they would have to take on, and you would have riots. And it's just not feasible. The marches themselves are the problem, and so I personally think that absolutely they should never have been allowed and should not be allowed. There is another point to these marches, which is an even more difficult point to make in this current climate, but I believe it to be very important. We know that the first attempt, or the first initiative to have one of these marches took place on October the 7th.
Yeah.
That was when the first application was made for the first march, I believe, in London. Now, I think it's wrong to think of these marches as primarily being organised in order to protest about the war in Gaza. These marches are primarily organised. They're organised primarily by Islamists of various stripes, Hamas, Iran, whatever, and their acolytes in Britain. But the driving force is Islamism, is Islamists. And what they're all about is an ecstatic, delirious celebration of the fact that they believe that October 7 breached Israel's defenses in a way that had not been thought possible, and that from that moment on, the way was becoming clear for them to finally defeat Israel, kill Jews, and then move on to defeat the West. And that is what's kept it all going. It's this belief that they are on a roll, that they are on the winning side. And that belief has been hugely fueled by the perceptible reality that the British state, like other governing classes in different countries, but the British state is sitting back and letting it happen. So what they're letting happen is, first of all, a movement on the streets which is celebrating and inciting people to join in for the final battle to destroy Israel, kill Jews, and then take over the West. And there is, what I'm actually saying, therefore, is that what we have on the streets in these marches is actually the jihad. This is what it is. This is one of the ways in which it's done. You take over public space of a secular state, and you, as it were, lay down your flag, or you raise your banner in that secular space, and you say it's no longer a secular space. It's ours. We are now taking over. It's a sign. It's a signal. It's a signal to the faithful that we are on the way to defeat Britain. It's a kind of uprising, and people can't see this because they don't understand what Islamism is. They never have done in Britain, and no government minister has ever said it. But that's what they've allowed to happen. They've allowed the streets to be taken over by Islamism. And that is incredibly dangerous and important and significant for the security of Britain as a whole. Because, the streets are where the battle is being joined, and useful idiots who are not Muslims are coming along to join in on the basis that they are, opposing Israel and supporting the Palestinians. But actually, what they're doing is being suborned into the jihad. And this is fantastically important for Britain. If Britain wanted to put down a red line against the Islamization of Britain, against the attempt to turn Britain Islamic, it would be saying, these marches, we know what these marches are, we're not going to have that. And we are going to show the Islamists that we understand the game they're playing, and we are not going to allow it. And that itself would send a very, very important signal to those Islamists that, okay, Britain is fighting back. It is not what we thought, which is, it's just lying down in front of us or offering its throat to be cut by us. We've got a fight on our hands. Unfortunately, British state doesn't do that. Few people understand that. But I think it's actually a very important aspect of these marches.
Something remarkable is happening. For decades, the world told us the problem was Zionism, occupation, international law. But lately, the mask is slipping. Muhammad Hijab, millions of followers, said in his own words,
"It's not just Zionism, it's Judaism as well. They believe they are superior to you
Tucker Carlson from the other direction keeps insisting, sorry, but the Jews are not the chosen people.
That there is no chosen people. The chosen people are people who choose Jesus.
Notice what both of these people, coming from completely opposite worlds, have in common. They're not talking about 1948, they're not talking about land, they're not even talking about Israel, they're talking about Jewish chosenness. And here's what blows my mind. This is not a modern argument. This argument is as old as the first two brothers who ever lived, Cain and Abel. God chooses one offering, not the other, and instead of learning from his brother, Cain kills him. The blueprint is right there at the very start, and it plays out again with Ishmael and Isaac. The roots of the Islamic world's relationship with the Jewish people. And with Esau and Jacob, the roots of the Christian Wests. The two great fault lines of Jewish history. And both of them begin not on a battlefield, but in a nursery. And here's what's extraordinary. The rabbis of the Talmud, thousands of years ago, summarized this whole phenomenon in just one sentence. Hatred, Sina, comes from Sinai. Sina is Hebrew for hatred. From the moment the Jewish people formalized their covenant with God at Mount Sinai, the world's resentment was ignited. In this JTV documentary, we're going all the way back. Back to the very first fracture in human history. Back to the first act of violence ever recorded. Because when you understand that moment, you understand anti-Semitism completely, where it truly comes from, why facts and arguments alone will never be enough to defeat it, but most importantly, what the Torah has always known about how to finally heal it. Because for the first time, we're not just diagnosing the world's oldest disease, we're finding the cure. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description. I could not agree more, and one of the fundamental problems in the West, which you've been raising the red flag about for a long time, is that these people are utilizing the freedoms of the West in order to destroy it. And there has to be a point at which we say stop. And after the stabbing attack last week, I had a conversation with one of my rabbis in America, Rabbi Manis Friedman, and I said, what do you think should be British Jews' message to the government? And he said, there should be demands that, just more broadly, the standard of expectation in public life is raised, and that will have knock-on effects, ripple effects, precisely as you're saying. He compared it to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, that there was a very steep drop in crime because, and some people, sociologists have connected it to even things unrelated to, severe crime, just like saying littering and spitting on the streets and loud music is now going to be banned. So when you raise, right now, as you said, these Islamists and others think they can just, they can walk over everyone and walk over the streets here. So completely agree with that. And one of the other things that I feel like we've been taught to say is one of those Hasbara cliches is, look, criticism of Israel, of course that's legitimate. Of course there should be room for that. But our problem is when it becomes delegitimization, demonization. And I have to say that I'm getting a bit tired of saying that line, not because it's not true, but because whenever is the criticism that we hear, I'm talking outside of pro-Israel and Jewish circles, outside of that. When is it ever actually a legitimate criticism and not just something that would undermine Israel's very ability to defend itself?
Well, yes. I mean, it's not legitimate because it's based on lies, distortion, omission, misleading information of one kind or another. That's why it's not legitimate.
What I'm saying is, do you agree with my assessment that basically most of what we hear, the criticism is not even a legitimate form of criticism, even if it's...
Yes, it's. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I hear legitimate criticism. I mean, okay, you can, and people can, they hate Netanyahu. Okay, fine. They think that Ben Gvir and Smotrich are beyond the pale. Okay, that's fine. That's a legitimate point of view. They can say that Israel's policies are wrong. Fine. But if they say that Israel effectively has no right to defend itself, and if they make Israel's self-defense, if they expect Israel in its self-defense to attain totally unattainable standards, like, don't kill a single civilian kind of thing,
Yeah.
then it becomes preposterous. And that's not legitimate criticism at all. That's something quite different. That is prejudice, that is double standards, and that is malevolent. So that is the distinction that should be made. And on the basis of that kind of distinction, I think I agree. There's been very little legitimate criticism because people aren't interested in criticizing the policies of the state of Israel. Why would they be? I mean, they're no more interested in criticizing them than they are criticizing the policies of Belgium. It's irrelevant. The reason that they so-called criticize Israel is because they want to jump up and down on its head.
Of course.
As they do, for example, against Republican America, Trump's America. They don't leap to denounce America when it's run by a Democratic president. So it's where we're talking about malice, we're talking about malevolence, and it's very easy to see. Once you see it, you can't stop seeing it.
Yeah. The broadcaster Mehdi Hassan just recently on X had a bit of a go at you, which I would consider to be a badge of honor. And I saw you responded as well. I just wanted to get that up on the screen here so people can see this. Let me just zoom out a bit so people can see there. So Chris Doyle wrote, "Why is Phillips, who's talking about you being on Sky News, who denies the existence of Palestinians as a people, who is an apologist for genocide and apartheid, and blatantly anti-Muslim, being platformed?" And Mehdi Hassan writes, "Oh, that Melanie Phillips, who is engaged in the most unhinged and vicious bigotry. The forces of Islam are a death cult. No such thing as a Palestinian people. Continues to be invited onto news shows. Tells you everything about our media's double standards on racism and extremism." And you replied, "Thanks so much for the plug, Mehdi, and how delightful that Mayor Mamdani came to your party in New York last night." I mean, I looked at that and look at these things he's accusing you of. I think, what's not to disagree with here? You're just stating the truth.
Well, some of it is what not to disagree with, and some of it is stuff that I just haven't said. Well,
for example, there not being a coherent Palestinian nation.
Yeah, I've said
to be fact.
I absolutely, and that is I think a demonstrable fact. But other stuff that he ascribes to me is just not true. And it's just, defamatory. But frankly, I mean, who cares about Mehdi Hassan and Chris Doyle? I mean, these are apologists for unconscionable people doing unconscionable things. And I mean, why, I just don't even feel the need to bother with the arguments that they make most of the time. They have to be treated with derision. I mean, that's how they should be treated, because they should have no standing whatsoever anywhere. I mean, intellectually, they're just rubbish.
Yeah. And what do you say to those who feel, let's say on our side, they're just too nervous to say something as bold as, well, there is no Palestinian nation, even though you and I know that's the case, or they're nervous to talk about the problems that exist in Islamic culture, even though the data and the polling literally demonstrate there are widespread problems, but they're just scared to say it?
Yeah, I think certainly people are very frightened, terrified, in fact, to speak critically about anything in the Islamic world. And I think that fear drives all before it. But on the other hand, in addition to that, people are very ignorant of the Islamic world and of Islam, and consequently they don't feel that they are able to say anything. And both of those feelings are, I think, perfectly understandable, but they are unfortunate because people should know and they should speak up. But when you consider the argument that there is no such thing as the Palestinian people, again, tremendous amount of ignorance about this, and certainly fear, because it goes against the kind of core belief of all right-thinking people, i.e. wrong-thinking people. But I have to say, and this is it's an unfortunate fact, that many Jews don't know that.
Yeah.
There are many Jews who think, well, Palestinians are fine, but Hamas is awful. Or, of course we should have a two-state solution because there are lots and lots of Palestinians who just want a decent life. And we have to find ways of empowering them. This is all great if it were true. So I produced lots of arguments which I think are founded in fact, in law, and in history, and in reality, to show it's not true. But there are lots of Jews who will not believe this. They don't want to believe it. They want to believe that there are lots and lots of Palestinians with whom we can do business. Now, I'm mainly living in Israel now. And the idea of a Palestine state ceased to have political traction quite some time ago. I think the Second Intifada dealt a heavy blow to that, because people then thought, well, there is no what's called partner for peace. There is no Palestinian authority, by which I mean leader, who is prepared to make this peace. And so it's just not a practical proposition. And Israeli politicians who would argue for the two-state solution find that they don't get much public support. Nevertheless, I think there was a great sort of reservoir of hope that it could be possible, and a great reservoir of hope that there were lots of Palestinians who were just so ill-served by their leaders, and who, if they were better served by better leaders, would come on board and would live alongside Israel. I think a lot of people, well, I don't know about a lot, but certainly some thought that. And certainly that was what was believed by those people who lived in what's called the Gaza envelope, the kibbutz communities alongside Gaza. We know so many of them befriended Gazans, befriended Palestinians, made a point of working with them, performed all kinds of acts of kindness for them, drove them to hospital appointments in Israel, and so on and so forth. And we know that those Gazans took the opportunity of those close relationships to map out every house and every street and every family in order that they should be murdered. And we also know from what the hostages who survived have told us that not one Gazan came to their aid. Not one Gazan showed them kindness, and not one Gazan informed to the Israelis on where they were in order to save them. And then you also look at the polling, the Palestinian polling that's taken place regularly. And since October 7, we've looked at it with keen interest to see whether attitudes have changed, how attitudes have changed. And the overwhelming majority of the ordinary Gazans, and even more of the ordinary Palestinian Arabs living in what's called the West Bank, they approved of October 7, they cheered it, and they would want it to happen again, and they want Israel gone, and they want Jews dead. Now, that is why in Israel, since October 7, there has been, a much harder attitude, a hardening of the attitude towards the Palestinian Arabs, on the basis that if we ever thought that we could have a situation in which they would be prepared to let us live here in our Jewish state, where we were wrong. They won't. They don't, and they won't, ever. We know that now. And that has produced, I think, a change in, Israeli political attitudes as a result. I mean, public attitudes.
Yeah. I saw a funny line the other day. It said 99% of Palestinians really do give the rest a bad name. And, I think
I have
that...
to say, let me interrupt you. Clearly, there have to be some decent Palestinians.
Of course.
Palestinian Arabs.
By the way, I learned recently that it's that there was actually a Gazan. Someone personally seems to have become aware of this, that gave intel to the IDF and Hamas ended up killing him and ended up providing intel for a hostage. So I know it's very rare. And I know also that from what we know, it's very rare. And we know that, from polling data and all of that. But of course, I'm not making it, as a joke. I'm not making a blanket statement on everyone saying that, there are, immutable characteristics that exist with the Arabs.
One is talking. I'm talking about, the statistical majority, which suggests that those Palestinian Arabs who are reasonably well disposed towards the Israelis are few and far between.
Yeah. And I do believe that even maybe, who knows, the majority of them could one day have, positive relationships with Jews, but not under a Palestinian state, because the whole Palestinian concept is inherently hateful and anti-Semitic, in my view.
You have to basically what's called denazify them. They have been inculcated from the cradle, generations of them, to hate Jews, to fear Jews, to loathe Jews, to want to murder Jews, and to destroy Israel and take it for themselves. But it's the Jewish thing that is so poisonous. And you have to basically de-radicalize an entire society. Now, that's a tall order, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's what has to be done before you can actually hope that proper peace can break out between the two communities.
Yeah, but my personal view is that peace we can never indulge in the idea that it could look like, there being two states. So I don't know what, Trump has proposed a solution of remigration. Some have said Israelics, and they're just, have some autonomous, whatever. I personally don't think, because there's too much in their culture and religious history and this national identity that created that's entirely cynical, that would be too much of a security risk for Israel. It's just my view there. And also from a positive standpoint, I think, we've given them a chance to have autonomy for 100 years, hasn't produced much. And from the positive standpoint, this actually is the Jewish people's land.
More to the point, they've been offered a state of their own, I think, on 6 occasions at least. And every time, either the Jews pre the state of Israel or the Israelis have gone along with it, agreed to it, or indeed have offered it themselves. And in every occasion, the response has been to turn it down and redouble the campaigns of mass murder and war and terrorism.
Yeah. So your book, again, I just want to put up on screen for everyone, Fighting the Hate, a handbook for Jews under siege. Really fantastic stuff. And you provide principles and specific tactics for engaging in debates on Israel, making the case for Israel. People should check out your social media where they can get a flavor for that, and also order the book on Amazon. But can you give us, what do you feel is one of the core messages you're trying to get out to people in terms of the strategy shift that we need to employ?
The main strategy shift is to stop playing defense and to get off the back foot onto the front foot, by which I mean, I think, as long as I can remember, Jews have played defense, faced with the allegations that have come at us about Israel. We throw up our hands and say, why are you being so horrible to us? We are the victims here. We are the victims we are the targets of genocide. We are the victims of mass terror. We are standing up for, our right to live. We adhere to legal principles. Why are you telling us these? Why are you making these lies about us? It's not true. We're not committing genocide. How ridiculous accusation. It's not true that the Israelis are killing so many civilians out of wanton disregard for their lives. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Now, all of that is correct, but it's the wrong strategy, because if you engage with people who are hurling these defamatory lies at you, if you engage with them on the ground that they've laid down, then you've lost before you've started. It's the equivalent of when did you stop beating your wife question. Once you engage with that, if you try and answer it, then you get sucked into you get sucked into the impression that you're actually trying to weasel out of what actually you've done. Whereas the correct response is to say, well, this is a preposterous question. It's completely unanswerable. And so I won't answer it. So my whole underpinning the advice that I've given in the book is to say that that strategy has to change, and that one should be seeking to change the narrative to a small degree if you're just an individual, and to a larger degree if you're a community leader. Change the narrative by, if you're an individual, as I said before, open the mind a crack, putting into the person's mind a thought that they, or a fact, or an observation, or a question that hasn't occurred to them, and that actually expands their knowledge about Israel, Jews, Middle East, to a limited extent, and that surprises them, that intrigues them, and that, park your anger and distress as individuals. The anger and distress is overwhelming. The injustice of it, the insult, park it. You may feel better if you vent at them, but you're not going to get absolutely nowhere. Park your anger and distress and regard these attacks as an opportunity to do something positive, which will open their minds a crack. And therefore, come up with one fact, one observation that will do that. Now, I've made several suggestions. People may not like those suggestions, but the point is that once you get into that frame of mind, once you get into that way of thinking, you make up your own ripostes. And as far as the community is concerned, it's just got to get off its knees. I mean, it is astonishing to me in Britain that, the British Jewish leadership, and I think they're not much different from America, or Australia. They're a bit more feisty, but not much. They don't say what needs to be said. I mean,
Appeasement.
Indeed, they don't say, for example, well, I've said earlier in this conversation, there's no such thing as Palestine. There's no such thing as the Palestinian people. It was cooked up in order to destroy Israel. They don't talk about Muslim anti-Semitism. What do they talk about? They talk about Islamophobia. I mean, the Jewish community leadership, for the last N years has said Islamophobia is as bad as anti-Semitism. It's the same as anti-Semitism. We must fight both together. I mean, this is beyond stupid. It is really quite immoral to make that equation, not least because it brands people like me who do talk about Muslim anti-Semitism as Islamophobic. So it shuts people like me down for saying something that is necessary and important for people to hear, and in the defense of the Jewish people, and in fact for wider society as well. So the Jewish community leadership has to get up off its knees, and it has to start saying things which are true, which they don't say, and it also should start repositioning Jews as not just fighting the good fight for Israel, which is a sort of very narrow canvas, but it should acknowledge what few Jewish leaders, I think, even think about, but certainly don't say, which is that the fight against anti-Jewish hatred is part of the fight to defend Western civilization, which is under attack from predatory Islam, from Islamism. Now, in that fight, the Jews have potentially many allies in other minorities and in the majority. So there are many Christians who are waiting for their own church to lead them in this fight, and they find to their horror that it's actually in the forefront. It's literally on its knees to predatory Islam, and it's in the forefront of undermining the West's own defenses of its historic identity. But there are lots and lots of Christians who do get it, and who are the Jews' potential allies in this. I mean, Jews should be joining with Christians to fight in the public sphere for recognition of and opposition to and protest against what's going on in Africa and other parts of the developing world, in which Christians are being decimated. They're being massacred. They're being burned alive in their churches. No one speaks about this. Now, what an opportunity that would be for Jews to make a point of allying with Christians and really campaigning on this. And this would achieve many things. First of all, it would improve relations between Jews and Christians. Secondly, it might well do some good in alerting the world or focusing the world's conscience on what's happening to Christians, and therefore it might alleviate their plight. And thirdly, and no less important, it would tell the great masses in the West who don't really think about national identity in terms of its core principles being embedded in the Bible, in Christianity and in Judaism. They regard these as irrelevant, and they think that the core values that they believe in, like, compassion and putting the value, putting the interests of other people first, and upholding the value of every human life and all those sorts of things. They think that was given to the West by the Greeks, or it's implanted in our DNA at birth. I mean, it's complete nonsense. It was given by the Bible, by Judaism actually, and then through Christianity became the core values of the West. Now, if Jews and Christians were to unite in defense of Christians who are being slaughtered around the world, that would actually help tell the great masses in the West that there is something worth fighting for, that Western values are actually better than others, that they believe in the value of human life, that they really do believe in standing up against gross abuses of power and mass murder, and that Jews and Christians are part of this great battle. This would be a tremendous thing. Instead of the West telling itself as it does, everything the West does is awful. The West is just racist. It's just pathetic. It oppresses other people. As for Jews and Christians, well, they're just sort of ridiculous, backward-looking minorities. Who cares about them? It would transform everything. So that's just one example of where the Jewish community would be proactive and think out of the box. Stand back, think out of the box, make allies, and fight the good fight on behalf of a much wider swathe of society.
Yeah, and you provide a bunch of really brilliant suggestions, both from a strategy point of view, also in terms of specific arguments and how you would suggest turning the tables or responding to them. Again, really, really encourage people to get themselves a copy of this book. And in our bonus section, I want to talk to you a bit about, you've studied anti-Semitism now for such a long time and anti-Zionism, what you consider to be the deeper roots of this, what you really put this down to, and also something we've been seeing more recently, the now very clear overlapping between the far left and the far right, or the woke right, or the woke Reich, as I heard Netanyahu call it, and the Islamists, and how we can make sense of that. In the next bonus section, Melanie explains why the woke right and left and Islamists have all converged in their hostility toward Israel, and even more fascinatingly, what she believes is the only real explanation for Jew hatred. To join us for this part of the conversation, as well as access a whole new range of JTV Plus premium content and be part of regular group Zoom calls with me, just click on the link below in the video description. I'll see you there.